Hello, everyone. Welcome to my podcast. I'm Andy Biggs from Arizona's 5th Congressional District. I am joined today by an incredible judicial watcher, scholar, intellect, uh, just does great work, author. Carrie Severino is the president of the Judicial Crisis Network. She's the co-author with Molly Hemingway of the best-selling book, Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Court. As an expert on the confirmation process, Mrs. Severino has been extensively quoted in the media and regularly appears on television, including MSNBC. I don't know why you go there. I don't know why you go on CNN.
Someone's got to do it.
Someone's got to do it. But also on Fox, C-SPAN, and ABC's This Week. I appreciate her being here with us today. There's so much to say about her qualifications. She clerked for one of the best Supreme Court justices in the history of the country, Clarence Thomas. She was a clerk to Judge David B. Sintel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, a graduate of Harvard Law, Duke University in biology, and Michigan State University in linguistics. So it isn't like she's, your interests are broad. You're an expert in a broad area of topics. And so it's an honor just to be with you today, Carrie. And let's talk about court capture. Let's talk about the threats from the left to pack the court. Tell me what that means. Tell us a brief history of it and this threat and intimidation that's being used right now.
Yeah, so this has been something that has been floated before. This is not the first time we've had people talk about packing the court. And when we talk about packing the court, what we're referring to is changing the number of justices for political ends. The number of justices isn't fixed in the Constitution. It doesn't have to be 9. It hasn't always been 9. It's been 5. It's been 10. It's even numbers. So you could have a tie vote in cases, but it's been 9 justices for over 100 years, and that number. The most recent time attempts to court pack came up was under FDR. He was, with his New Deal legislation, was having a lot of trouble because the court kept on saying, nope, sorry, that's not constitutional, not constitutional. And so he came up with the idea of, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to add some seats to the court. We'll just add enough seats so I can put enough people on. So I have a majority on the court, basically, who I know is going to agree with my legislation. That idea, despite the fact that FDR was obviously an incredibly popular president, right, the one who's been reelected the most times, he had a democratically controlled Senate that wanted to help him. They said, this is a horrible idea. Don't do this. And in fact, they rejected it. The Democratic Senate rejected it. They lost a lot of seats as a result because it was so incredibly unpopular. You have now this idea that was tried and found wanting in the 1940s. Now let's bring it back and maybe we'll try it again. And I think it is so wrongheaded that you have people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Bernie Sanders who both agree this is a horrible idea. Bernie Sanders said, look, this is something that you're just going to lead to this spiral where Democrats say, well, we're going to add two or three seats or however many seats we need in the court to get a majority. And then the next thing happens, Republicans are going to add it too. And then Democrats and Republicans. He goes, you're going to have 87 justices before long. This is a horrible idea. Ruth Bader Ginsburg herself said, guys, we tried this with FDR. It wasn't a good idea. Let's not go down this route. So if you are now to the left of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Bernie Sanders, what's going on, folks? This is such a blatantly partisan move. So it's not even like, hey, there's too much of a work burden on the justice. You can imagine reasons you could say, okay, maybe it makes sense to have one justice for every circuit or something like that. That's not what they're saying. They're explicitly saying, we want partisan control of the court. And what the challenge here is, for much of recent American history, really since FDR, not actually Democrats, a lot of them were Republican appointees, but liberals have had control of the courts. Many of them, as I said, people like Eisenhower appointed Earl Warren, one of the most liberal chief justices of all time, Bill Brennan, John Paul Stevens, who was for a long time, recently, the leading liberal in the court was appointed by Gerald Ford. So the liberals had real stronghold on the court, and they often would use it to circumvent your branch, Congressman. They didn't, rather than letting the legislature do their job, if it couldn't get done by democratically elected majorities in the legislature, people would just run to the court, and the court would, oh sure, rubber stamp whatever liberal policy they did. The frustration they're feeling is maybe understandable, because finally we have been slowly, starting with Reagan, and then it has unfortunately been a two steps forward, one step back process. And we've had to learn things from all these judicial nominations that unfortunately haven't gone as well. Many, like Justice Thomas, great picks. Others, Justice Souter, who was great, a dark horse pick. Nope, turned out to be one of the liberal justices. So it's been slow, but we're finally at a point where instead of judges who are just enacting liberal policies from the bench, we have judges who are following the law from the bench. They're not enacting conservative policies either. They're just, let's follow what the law says and how the law is written and how the Constitution is written. That puts it back in your branch, sir. You guys can make the laws. That's how our Constitution designed it. The left doesn't want to see that. That's why you're seeing them now saying, we want to regain control, even if it means running over and bulldozing our institutions in the process.
Yeah, I mean, you raised two quick points that I want to emphasize is the packing of the court is just another way to politicize the court. I mean, and it becomes a tool. And I was thinking that you'd probably end up with 435 judges, because at some point everybody gonna get to pick their own judge.
Yeah.
And then I guess the other thing that we see here is this idea of diversity on the court, I'm not sure what they mean when they say diversity on the court, because you got Earl Warren, which, by the way, Eisenhower said was the worst mistake he ever made as president.
I'll agree with him on that one.
But when you move on, you start talking about diversity of the court. They don't want diversity on the court, because diversity on the court would be having Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas, for instance, and then you have people who think that the international law supersedes Constitution, like Sotomayor and Kagan. So diversity of the court might be something totally different. They don't want that. They want control of the court, because, as you said, if they can't get their policies through over here, they want liberal legislators sitting on the bench in black robes.
Exactly. You just have to look at the way they've treated Justice Clarence Thomas to say they're not going, oh wow, this is wonderful. You have identified someone who really lived the American dream. Abandoned by his father, raised by his grandparents, coming from absolute abject poverty to the highest court in the land, and really distinguishing himself, I think, is now absolute unqualified leader of the conservative wing of the court. They're not celebrating his accomplishments, right? They're not saying, "Hey, how do we get a day named after you?" or how do we highlight him during Black History Month? They're angry because they're using all sorts of racist epithets against him, because they don't actually care about diversity for diversity's sake. They just want their own position represented, and probably they don't even care who does it. It's just, and this is the same thing we're seeing here. Are we seeing liberals going, wow, this is really exciting. We're going to see a woman appointed to the Supreme Court who, in the mold of Justice Ginsburg herself, is going to be a mother, a scholar, a judge who's accomplished things at the highest levels. No, they only care about finding someone who is going to vote exactly the same as Ginsburg. So it's just a cover, I think, for, again, political capture of the court. Right.
And so what we've seen already is, Amy Coney Barrett is emerged as for lack of a better term, maybe the leader of the short list of potential replacements. And we can talk about that in a sec, but they're already going after her for her religious views. And I find that so reprehensible. Tell me, I mean, when's the last time that happened? I think we can go back I would say probably 100, maybe right about 100 years when we started talking about religious tests on the Supreme Court. But I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's not just reprehensible and un-American, it's literally unconstitutional. The Constitution says there are no religious tests for office. So when people like Dianne Feinstein, during Barrett's first confirmation hearing to the Seventh Circuit, we're going down and saying, well, the dogma lives loudly within you, and I think that's a cause for concern. You have to go, really? This is not what we stand for as America. Didn't we have this discussion when John F. Kennedy was running for president about, are we going to have a rule that Catholics need not apply? We had this discussion when in the early Jewish justices of the court. Hey, wait a minute. Are we willing to accept? Yes, of course we should be. This is what the Constitution says. So we don't have a religious test for office, and that is something that I worry that's the direction. And I agree. I think Barrett's the front runner, but Barbara Lagoa, another front runner, also Catholic. Allison Rushing has been spoken about, is a committed evangelical. I think this is a direction they're going to go particularly with a woman, because they're not going to probably go the same way they did with Kavanaugh and Thomas, where they try to make sexual assault allegations. It seems like the new, okay prejudice to have is religious prejudice, and I think that's horrible, and it's the wrong direction for our country. It's unconstitutional, and I think it's actually, if they do that, it will be overplaying their hand in a way that I think ultimately would be very damaging. Because I think Americans across the political spectrum recognize that for all of us, our religious faith is something that's deeply held and something to be celebrated. Justice Ginsburg talked very eloquently about how her own Jewish faith inspired her to go into the law and to seek justice. That doesn't mean we're all going to come to the same agreement, whether it's on religious principles or on jurisprudential principles, but respecting that religious instinct that is a fundamentally human value is also a fundamentally American value.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm with you. In our judiciary hearing just the other day, a member from Tennessee actually raised Coney Barrett's religious affiliation, and I thought, how can you just sink so low so quickly when she's not even the nominee? I mean, we don't even know who the nominee is yet, right. But they're already attacking her. So let's talk about the potential nominees and what Saturday might look like. The president's already said that Saturday's the day he's going to name his nominee, and then tell us about the confirmation process that's going to take place in the Senate, which may be compared to, say, Justice Kavanaugh's quite accelerated.
Yeah, so certainly faster than his. His, of course, got dragged out even further because that was the Democratic technique the whole time, as they thought, delay. Maybe we can, hopefully win the Senate back and block this altogether, right? So notwithstanding the fact that they've been successful in dragging some of these out, historically, actually, the precedent is you can go much faster on a nomination. And you don't have to go back 100. I mean, if you go back 100 years, you were talking like same day confirmation. So obviously you go way back, it's totally possible. There didn't even used to be hearings. And then when they started having hearings, the judges didn't even show up for the hearings. They thought that wouldn't even be appropriate. So look, none of this is really constitutionally required. But if you look at relatively recent history, Justice Ginsburg herself took her 42 days to be confirmed. And she was confirmed, by the way, virtually unanimously, despite being very clear. I mean, she'd done all this work for ACLU Reproductive Justice Project. She was clearly a woman of the left. Everyone knew it. And yet almost unanimously confirmed, right? Justice O'Connor, 33 days. Justice Stevens, 19 days to be confirmed. And these are all people who've served recently, right? This is not impossible to do. And there's ample time at this point. In the other factor that I think makes it actually even easier is it's hard to imagine a White House that's more ready to make this pick than the one we have right now. They literally just days ago completed updating their short list for the Supreme Court. So they've done all the vetting on these women that they're looking at in very short order. So they can make this decision quickly because they literally have just done this research. It just providentially, the timing turned out like that. All of the women that we're looking at on this, that sound like they're on the short list, have been recently confirmed by the Senate by bipartisan majorities. So it's not like the Senate's going to be seeing someone that's a total blank slate to them. These are people who recently had their FBI investigations done, recently there's a very involved questionnaire that you have to fill out for the Senate, like everything you've ever written, every speech you've ever given. That does take a lot of time to put together. But guess what? All of the women we're looking at just did that recently. So they just have to bring it up to date for the last few years. We're actually in an incredibly good position to move quickly on this. And, going into an election year that, unfortunately, I think we're going to see court challenges. We've already seen a lot of issues with, mail-in voting and how ballots are counted. And we all know the experience of Bush v. Gore. Having a full complement on the court, I think, will be key, because you don't want to have, in the middle of a lot of confusion anyway, a 4-4 court coming to a tie decision on what could be a very determinative case.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I really think that we're going to see this next election decided in the court itself, and I think it's unfortunate, but I think that's the direction we're moving, and it seems inevitable to me. But let's talk briefly about the different judicial philosophies of the left and the right. I don't know if I would say they've devolved, but there certainly has been this very big split from the time that I was in law school seemed like a millennium ago. But the question is, how has the judicial philosophies really become different? I remember the Warren Court was so influential in all the cases I was reading back in my law school days, and Justice Douglas, who famously said one time something like, "Well, I reach my decision and then I look for cases to support it." So, I mean, how do we see the judicial philosophy? How's that evolved in the split over the years?
Yeah, so the era you're talking about was this classic era of, again, the liberal control of the courts, and this is where what we talk about is judicial activism, really got going. I mean, it's something. There's different phases in American history where there've been issues, but early on, and Joseph Story, great early justice, was really clear about the idea of we have to understand what the original meaning is of these words, or you're not. If you're just like if you're interpreting a contract, you have to understand what the people who signed it meant by those words. Doesn't mean what they meant in some other language or what they meant in a different place or a different time. You have to know what they meant. The Constitution is effectively a contract between Americans and their government, ceding certain of their natural rights to the government. So we have to interpret it according to how it was understood at the time, whether that means the time it was originally ratified or a particular amendment itself was ratified. Right, and same thing for laws. This is kind of basic statutory interpretation. That wasn't what was being used during this era. For a long time, the courts went off into an era where they were kind of looking more at we'll look at maybe what the purpose of the law is, and then we'll decide as judges what's the best way to affect that purpose. Sometimes you would have cases where you have a whole briefing and a whole argument, and the text of the law itself, the actual statute you're interpreting, wouldn't even come up. Like it might be in a footnote or in an appendix, which is bizarre. You think of it, especially as a modern lawyer, you think, well, gosh, how can I know what the interpretation of if I don't even know what the words I'm interpreting are? They had gotten so far removed from what the actual language of the laws was. This is what was being pushed back against then when you come into the Reagan era and the rise of Robert Bork, Justice Scalia were all very influential in trying to bring us back. And then the rise of the Federalist Society, which was really founded because they realized on campuses people were only being told this kind of modern orthodoxy of you can kind of do whatever you want as a judge, whatever you can get 5 votes for. That was one of the sayings. I think it was Brennan who said this is the rule of 5. If as long as you get 5 votes for it, you can do anything on the court. And that's not a very respectful of the Constitution or the law that you took an oath to uphold, right? So now we had this rise of an understanding that's in tension with this liberal one. Are we looking at what the law actually says? Are we bound by the text of the law and the Constitution, or can we either just look at what the purpose and the goals of the law are and make it up, or as people like Justice Breyer, who still serves in the court now, have said, is it about active growth of the Constitution? So yes, they said, these words, but these words have changed and grown along the years. And of course, who gets to decide how they've changed or grown and what they've grown into? 5 justices of the Supreme Court, not anyone who was elected by the American people. That's a very dangerous position because it takes the Constitution out of its context. Our founders knew that they might have to update it. And this is why we've had 27 amendments to the Constitution. They knew it wasn't supposed to be final the way it was because they knew there'd be new challenges and that this young nation would encounter over the years. But they didn't ever intend for it to be amended by 5 votes of Supreme Court justices. There's a process. It requires states ratifying amendments or members of Congress doing so. It's not meant to be done by a simple majority vote of unelected judges. So now you have a situation where there's a lot of judges who have recognized the importance of the text of the Constitution. Then there's others who kind of will maybe pay lip service to the text, but then also bring in other areas. The other danger there is, even if you're a judge who has the best of intentions, when you're bringing in things like, how do I think the purpose is being served? Or where do I think the American people is evolving to? It's almost impossible as a judge to keep your own political interests and instincts out of that process. So even for a judge that's trying in good faith not to bring their politics in, it's almost impossible not to when you're asking questions like that. That's one of the great things about textualism and originalism, is it takes that politics out, because you're just looking at the words. And many times, and this is what Justice Scalia said, if I agreed with every result I came to, then I'm not a good judge. And I've heard Trump nominees say that's one of the hard things about their job, is you're often coming to a result that you think is a bad result because the law is bad, because the law is outdated, because it was sloppily written, all sorts of reasons. But you know what? That's not your job. And on one level, it's very freeing for a judge, and it takes the politics out of the process. Then it puts it back in the elected branches. If the law was bad, if it was badly written, if I just disagree with it, that's great. Fight that out in the democratic process. Get a new legislature that will update, change, improve the law. That's how our laws should be changed.
Well, Carrie, when you're telling me that, I don't know if you saw me, I'm writing down different things that just come into my mind about this. There's so much to ask you. You're so knowledgeable about this, and I won't go here, but what comes to my mind is the postmodern thought in the broader society that has infected the law. This kind of deconstructionist movement, the relativism movement that has actually infected the law, and right at the top of our U.S. Supreme Court, some of the justices sitting on there, and it gives them the grant to, they think, I guess, to actually impose their will, their desire, their vision on the facts before them, and also this notion of, do they apply the law? Is that what they're supposed to do, or are they supposed to interpret the law? And I think the founders would say they were supposed to apply the law. There's a lot of debate that went on back even in the late 1700s, early 1800s on how the court was going to work. So, but let's get back to where we are today, because I think of Robert Bork. I watched his confirmation hearing, was aghast. I watched the Thomas hearing. I couldn't believe it. But by the time we got to Brett Kavanaugh, it was like the other side was so totally unhinged in every which way. What might the next nominee expect to face, particularly with a truncated, or what is perceived to be a truncated vetting and committee process?
Yeah, well, look, from my perspective, unfortunately, what we've seen over the years is these hearings have really kind of become kabuki theater. And the Kavanaugh confirmation illustrated that more than anything else. So it was just, and the Democrats kind of knew it. They knew that what they were getting there, they weren't actually trying to find out, I'm really curious, what is his approach to these different cases? They were looking for sound bites. They were looking for, clips they could use for a campaign ad. Kamala Harris was jumping down his throat with these gotcha questions. She was in the process cutting ads for her hopeful presidential campaign. And you had people interrupting each other. I remember this is of course before even Christine Blasey Ford came on the scene, just at the beginning of these first confirmation hearings, and each member of the committee was supposed to have a 10-minute opening statement. Chuck Grassley's opening statement took over an hour, because before he got, seconds into it, his own colleagues were interrupting him. And then you had people standing up, screaming, getting dragged out. 200 people and more had to be arrested for disrupting those hearings. And much like we're seeing with the protests nowadays, this wasn't a spontaneous, people just came up with the idea of, oh, you know what, I'm going to go to the hearings and I'm going to stand up. No, there were groups, and literally people like Planned Parenthood acknowledged they were flying people in from key states, training them, giving them bail money, giving them legal advice as to how best to get arrested and how many times you could get arrested before they'd actually keep you overnight in jail, providing the handmaids costumes and everything. This is a organized affair. So I think one of the things that's going to be good about this process is I don't think we're going to be wasting time on some of the things that really aren't getting us anywhere. For example, in the Kavanaugh process, the day he was nominated, you had people like Chuck Schumer saying, we're going to do anything we can to oppose this nominee. All right, how much time do you need to spend visiting the offices and trying to dialogue with senators who, from the time you were nominated, some of them even literally before he was nominated, said, I'm going to vote against this person? you know, some of this is just, let's not waste everyone's time here. There's important things you guys could be doing, not that they're necessarily taking the correct important votes they should be taking anyway. But it's like, let's not kid ourselves. The hearings, you know, I think we will have hearings. Because of COVID, we won't be able to have them open to the public, but part of me is going, you know what, that's great. Now we don't have to have Code Pink standing up every 5 minutes. If you're going to have hearings, let's actually try to have some discussion of the nominees' actual record. Let's not try to do the silly gotcha games. Let's not do the Spartacus moments like Senator Booker did, where he's revealing committee confidential documents and all this shenanigans. Let's not play games with with Kavanaugh. They literally requested every single document that went through the entire Bush administration, whether Kavanaugh had seen it or not. Delay tactics. So I think some of this hopefully will streamline it and cut some of that out. Say, let's move forward. We'll have a hearing. We'll be able to hear from the nominee. We'll be able to hear from some witnesses. But then let's move forward. Don't pretend, Senator, some of the senators who have from the day one declared they're going to be against the nominee. Don't pretend you need to hear more to make your decision. We all, and again, these are potential nominees who you've all voted for in recent years. So if you didn't know what you thought back then, you already took a vote on her. So move forward, whether it's Lagoa or Barrett or any of them. It's nothing. It's no new news. So I think we're going to also, as we said, there are going to be attacks. We don't know exactly what they're going to look like. We know there's probably going to be procedural tricks they're going to pull. I just think at the end of the day, you're seeing people who are so frustrated because the challenge they're running into is the American people actually do want a nominee who's faithful to the Constitution and the rule of law. That is why we have President Trump in the White House. That is why we have Majority Leader McConnell in the Senate. In 2018, a lot of people, McConnell said after that election, thank you, Democrats, for lighting a fire under our base. They actually gained seats in 2018 because the American people were so frustrated at the politicization of the process through the Kavanaugh nomination. And I'm sorry if there are 51 senators who think that Amy Coney Barrett or Barbara Lagoa is the best person to sit in the Supreme Court next. And I think once you all get a chance to meet and get to know this nominee, I would hope there'd be more than 51, right? I think these are outstanding, trailblazing role models of women. Then, I'm sorry, guys. That's how the process works. And the Senate's role to advise and consent doesn't mean that a loud, violent, rioting minority gets to block the process.
Oh, well said. I mean, that's, Carrie, just marvelous talking to you. I mean, you're right on the money. And I say that because I agree with you on everything you said. So you got to be right. And I really appreciate
it's unanimous.
It's unanimous. And so what you do with Judicial Crisis Network, thanks for you guys being involved and pushing this stuff forward. I mean, and shining light on this. I mean, the attacks that you get because you're just trying to shine the light on this stuff is got to be ridiculous as well. I'm really appreciative of everything you do. Thanks for taking some time with us. Man, I'd love to spend more time because I really like the idea of discussing the judicial philosophy and the history of how that's kind of gone one way versus where it could have gone another way. I think we're on a suboptimum path on that, but hopefully we can take the court back and quite frankly, the last point I would make is something you said triggered this in my mind is what I see is that the left is really ticked off because they thought that their special base in place was the Supreme Court, and they used that to kind of control legislation and basically violate the separation of powers, and with a constrained conservative textualist type of court, I'm hoping that we can actually bring the separation of powers back within the bounds. So like the court gets back within its bounds. Maybe the legislature will finally become the most powerful branch. There are no three. The myth of three co-equal branches of government is not what the founders intended. They intended the judiciary to be the weakest branch and the legislature to be the strongest branch because it represented the people directly. Great job. Thanks for taking time with us today. And God bless you as you go forward. We'll be cheering you on.
Thank you. It's an honor to get a chance to chat with you and keep up the good work.
We'll do. You too. Thanks.